Hello and welcome in once again to the Waiver Wire Pod here at 4for4 Fantasy Football. I am Matt Okada, bringing you on a weekly basis the 3 to 4,000 word waiver wire column over at 4for4.com. If you are not subscribed to 4for4 and therefore cannot read it, you should rectify that because it is great. Touches on a lot of deeper ads, a lot of the top ads, and how much you should bid on them, all the good stuff. So go check that out if you haven't already. But I'm also here to host this podcast and go over the top 5 on my list overall at every position, and also answer some questions. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chats, and I will get to them at the end of the show. Week 9, almost completely in the books. I don't know if anything stood out particularly about this week. Sometimes I like to summarize how the week went on an overall perspective. I don't really know. We have had some head coach firings already. Dennis Allen was fired this morning, Saints head coach. So that's really interesting. I think Mike McCarthy should get fired, but I don't think it's going to happen. So such is life. All right. Since there's nothing overarching to say about this week, let's just get into the ads, shall we? Number 1, for the second straight week, is Cedric Tillman, wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns. Now, this is the reason that touching on the waiver wire column or being able to read the waiver wire column is so useful. Because last week when he was, I think, sub 20% rostered in Yahoo leagues, he was a number one priority. He was a number one priority in this podcast. And his rostership bumped up to 58%, which is not bad, but it is still below the cutoff for my column. And it means he's available in nearly half of Yahoo leagues, at least. So go see if he is out there in your league, because if he is worth essentially dropping all of your fab, depending on how much you have left. If you've hoarded all of your fab and you've got 90% left, then maybe you don't need to drop all of it on Cedric Tillman. But I legitimately would drop upwards of 50% of a fab budget to lock down Cedric Tillman if he is still available in your league. This last Sunday, he had 11 targets from Jameis Winston. He caught 6 for 75 and a last-minute toe-tapping garbage time touchdown. The touchdown was wildly unuseful to the game. Did not matter at all, and it was barely a touchdown. And before that, he had far fewer fantasy points. So it feels like that play saved his fantasy day, and it did, fair enough. But even before that touchdown, he had 10 targets and had 5 catches. And he is the number one, at least in terms of like prototypical X number one for the Cleveland Browns. Elijah Moore will probably get a lot of targets on a weekly basis. Jerry Jeudy is involved. David Njoku is involved. But in terms of who's the number one guy, who is Jameis Winston going to go to in the most important situations, and especially near the goal line and in the end zone, the answer is Cedric Tillman, and he looks like the real deal. He is a legitimate contested catch, big body, number one receiver. Gives a lot of Mike Evans vibes. Similar to T. Higgins in a lot of ways, except that he is the number one, whereas T. Higgins is not. Just briefly summarize his past 3 weeks in the post-Amari Cooper era. He's averaging 7 catches and 85 yards per game and has 32 targets and 3 touchdowns in those 3 games. And he is not a wide receiver one in that span. He is the wide receiver one in that span. The last 3 weeks, he's the number one wide receiver in fantasy. So he needs to be added. He must be 100% rostered by the end of this week. If you are in a league that he's not on the waiver wire, I don't care what the other factors are. How much fab you have left, who else is on your roster, it doesn't matter. Figure out who to drop and figure out how much of your fab to drop, maybe all of it, to get Cedric Tillman. All right. Have we hit on Cedric Tillman's value enough? I think so. Let's go to number 2. Number 2 is Xavier Legette, who was not this high in the waiver column or waiver priority last week, but he was in the column. Very talented, entertaining rookie, highly drafted. Curiously similar stat lines the last 2 weeks, and both were kind of mixed bags. 4 catches in both weeks, 34 yards and a touchdown 2 weeks ago, 33 yards and a touchdown this past week. So you'd like to see more in the yardage category. You'd like to see a little more in the catch category, but a touchdown both weeks is interesting. And both these weeks have been under Bryce Young at quarterback, and no one else on the team has been particularly great receiving. So it's not like someone else is, the number one and Leggett is just getting these numbers because he's playing behind someone. It's more just like Bryce Young can't support great uh, passing volume or passing numbers. So the hope here is that Andy Dalton becomes a starter again. We do not know if that is the case. Bryce Young has started the last couple weeks because Andy Dalton got in that car accident and has been recovering, or at least that's how the story has been presented. There was no discussion of any real injury to Andy Dalton, so maybe it's the case that they were giving Andy Dalton some time, but he's not actually hurt, could be playing, and they just want to give Bryce Young another chance. I don't know for sure. I don't think anybody does. Maybe not even the Panthers. But I hope and I kind of expect that Andy Dalton will be back at the starting quarterback position. If not, the hope otherwise is that, well, that means that it's because Bryce Young is functioning at a level where he actually can support decent wide receivers or a decent fantasy pass catcher. Because if he's not, it begs the question, well, why is he still in at quarterback if he can't even support one decent pass catcher? Probably means he's probably not doing a great job. So add Xavier Leggett if you can. Nowhere near the priority of Cedric Tillman. I have him at a 6-7% fab bid. Worth looking at, but not a break the bank for kind of guy. Probably a wide receiver 3 stash type of play where you hope things continue to get better for him. And I think that they very well might. So worth adding for that reason. And again, 1 touchdown each of the last 2 games means he's involved where it counts. All right. That's Xavier Leggett. Let's go to number 3. Number 3 is Bo Nix. Obviously, if you are in a 1 quarterback league, priority might drop a little bit on quarterback. And if you have a solid starter, then Bo Nix probably isn't this high of priority for you. But if you've been streaming, or if you have a guy that's been struggling or is hurt, if maybe you have Jordan Love, who should be great, but is maybe dealing with an ongoing injury right now and is not 100% and has kind of struggled of late, Bo Nix might be your guy. And if you're in a 2 QB league and he's not rostered, which probably is not the case almost anywhere, then he would be a mega ad. But he's just been legitimately great. This past week, not that great as a passer, but he still rushed for 36 yards, ended up with 223 yards and an interception, passing no touchdowns. And he caught a touchdown. If you have not seen the highlight, go look up Bo Nix receiving touchdown or something on Twitter, or find the YouTube highlights. He mossed a guy at the goal line to come down with a receiving touchdown from Cortland Sutton. So that actually was pretty significant in helping Bo Nix's day. The rest of the day was a little odd. He seemed kind of off against the Ravens, who had been beatable, but Nix just seemed to be missing a lot. But that hasn't been the case prior. And he brings that rushing upside. So his 36 rushing yards was actually not as high as he's had in previous weeks, but he's hit that mark or better in 3 of the last 4. And he's been a legitimate QB1 in 4 of his last 5 games. If you look over the past month as a whole, he is a top 5 fantasy quarterback, which I think is probably going under the radar. I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it's because he's a rookie. Maybe it's because he wasn't the highest drafted rookie. Maybe it's because his team's not all that great on offense. But he's been getting it done, and the rushing is a big part of that, which means he is a valuable starting quarterback. I would like to have him in a streaming combo, ideally. Part of that is I think there will be some other games he's not very good. Again, still a rookie, still can be taken advantage of probably by good defenses. So I'd like to have him in a streaming combo with someone like down in the waiver column, like Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, someone a little more established who we feel like we can maybe trust in good matchups as well. So see if you can pick him up with alongside somebody else and stream your way to a championship. Something I have been talking about a lot lately is if you search a player's name and 4for4 on Google, it will take you to their player profile page on 4for4.com. And there is a matchup bar with all of their matchups and the AFPA, adjusted fantasy points allowed, by that opponent, and a green or red based on how good or bad that matchup is. If you use that to combo a couple streamers together to find the matchups that work well with each other, to where when one is on bye or has a bad matchup, the other one has a great one, that is a really, really strong way, in my opinion, to stream your way, especially at the quarterback position, to a lot of wins in fantasy football. So use that strategy if you can, and use Bo Nix as part of it. Let's go to number 4. I have Elijah Moore at number 4. There are a lot of wide receivers that are kind of in the tier with Elijah Moore. Spoiler alert for the guy who's number 5. He is not in this tier, but there's a bunch of guys after him in the waiver priority who are. I'll actually hit on those names in a second, just so you know. But Elijah Moore is the guy that I chose out of the tier to be number 4 on the waiver priority, number 3 at the position this week. 2 Browns receivers. Huh? Yes, 2 Browns receivers. This is a new era in Cleveland. It is a Jameis Winston era. And if you remember back to the good old days of Jameis Winston, when he was throwing 30 touchdowns and 30 interceptions in the same season, he always had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And they were both always really good for fantasy. Cedric Tillman is the Mike Evans of this offense. Elijah Moore, for right now, it feels like, is the Chris Godwin of this offense. His outing on Sunday was incredibly inefficient, and the Browns and Jameis Winston just really did struggle against the Chargers in general. It is a really tough matchup, so I attribute some of it to that, a good amount of it to that, and that excuses things for Elijah Moore and Jameis Winston a little bit. But he had 9 targets and caught just 3 for 28 yards. So from a fantasy point perspective, terrible. He's probably not going to be heavily added this week as a result, and is only 14% rostered already. So it's probably going to be very easy to get Elijah Moore. I have him in a 3 to 4% fab bid. You may not even need to put in that much because of how bad this week was from a fantasy point perspective. But I think it's going to get better because he has the target share and has had it in a couple straight weeks now. It's 21 targets with Jameis Winston in 2 games. That when the matchups are not this tough, he will have a very, very good PPR floor and potentially ceiling, depending on how many of these targets he can turn into catches. It is primarily a PPR ad. I would not be super excited to add him in a non-PPR league or even a half PPR, though I still do like him in half PPR. But the priority here is primarily in PPR scoring. For good matchups. I would not play him in tough matchups, but after the Browns bye, which I believe is next week, which is another reason he's not going to be super hard to acquire this week. But after their bye, they get the Saints, who have been a great matchup for wide receivers. I believe that coming out of their bye, Cedric Tillman and Elijah Moore will be starts in Week 11 against the Saints. So if you would like a PPR guy to tuck away for that game and other good matchups down the stretch, I think Elijah Moore is a good option. Let's get to number 4. Oh, just a couple other names that are in that tier. This is a spoiler and a peek into the waiver wire article. For most of the rest of it, you got to subscribe to 4for4.com. Jalen Tolbert is in a very similar tier. Demario Douglas is in a very similar tier. And Demarcus Robinson is close to that tier, not quite as high for me, because his value is dependent on how Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are doing. But those guys are also interesting. Number 5, though, is Taysom Hill, one of my absolute favorite players in the NFL. I think one of the most interesting, dynamic, valuable offensive weapons in the NFL. And I have been championing him for years, even back in the days when Drew Brees was the quarterback and everybody hated when Taysom Hill would be used instead of this future Hall of Fame quarterback. Why would you take him out of the game and bring in this goofy Tim Tebow guy? The reason is because Taysom Hill is one of the most efficient, effective offensive weapons in the NFL. When he is involved in a play, it almost always goes well. He converts for first downs. It's he's just good. He's good at football, and he's tough to defend because offenses or defenses have no idea what he's going to do. Now, I will say this: Dennis Allen freaking loves Taysom Hill. I don't even know yet who the new head coach is going to be, or the interim head coach. Let me see if I can find that in 2 seconds with a search while I'm talking to you. Darren Rizzi. Does he have the Riz? TBD. Sorry. Darren Rizzi is the special teams coordinator. So there you go. Taysom Hill, very effective and valuable on special teams. So maybe Darren will like Taysom Hill and want to continue using him. Regardless, the one point of note here is that Dennis Allen loves Taysom Hill, and losing him could be a step down for Taysom. I don't really think that'll be the case. Again, Taysom Hill is just such an effective player that I think that any Saints head coach who comes in and is in an interim position would be intelligent to use Taysom Hill a lot. So I'm going to hope that that will be the case. This Sunday, he was essentially the RB2 behind Alvin Kamara because there was injuries to other Saints backups. Kendra Miller might be headed to IR, by the way. So Taysom might continue to hold this role. And he was also the tight end 1. And with Chris Olave exiting the game with a really rough hit and concussion, his second of the last, I think, month. And I believe it's like 5th or 6th since college. It's a really tough injury or concussion history for Chris Olave. Taysom Hill stepped up in Olave's absence and had 4 catches on 5 targets for 41 yards, which I think was his best receiving game of the year. I think there's a decent chance that Olave misses significant time here because this has been such a recurring issue. So that means Taysom Hill could be the RB1 and the wide receiver. I won't call him wide receiver 1, tight end 1 / leading or one of the leading pass catchers for this team for the foreseeable future. Whenever that is the case, whenever he's getting 10 plus opportunities in a game, you are going to want to have him on your roster, and you're going to want to have him in your lineup in a lot of leagues at the tight end position because there's not a lot of other good tight ends. And Taysom Hill has a legitimately better chance to score a touchdown than most of them, maybe almost all of them. So add Taysom Hill. I've got him as a 3 to 4% fab bid. Don't think you have to go crazy to get him, but he's heavily available and will be used in valuable situations, I believe, even in this new regime. So that is the top 5 ads: Cedric Tillman, Xavier Legette, Bo Nix, Elijah Moore, and Taysom Hill. Again, if Tillman is available, you're busting almost all of your fab or the number 1 waiver priority or whatever it is you use in your league to get him. I think he's going to be a stud rest of the season. 4for4.com/plans. Again, if you are not subscribed and don't have access to the waiver wire column, you want that access because you'll get all these names with more breakdown, the suggested fab bids, and then all the other players that I don't talk about here. And you will get some of these guys' names in the waiver wire column before they're in this podcast or before they're this high of priority. In fact, everybody on this list except for Taysom Hill was in last week's column at a lower priority. So this is what you get if you get the column. And you get a ton of other stuff when you subscribe to 4for4.com. And if you use promo code YouTube, you get 25% off. So do that. All right, let's get into some Q&A here. Keep the questions flowing, and I will keep the answers flowing. Let's see what we got. Cavo Richard says, first, thanks for this. You're welcome, Cavo Richard. I don't see a question following that yet, so I'll just accept your thanks for now. MacFam says, buenos dias, Matt, and then has quite a few other things in the chat, including I either picked him up for free 3 weeks ago or $7 a fab in Dynasty. I believe that is Cedric Tillman. Absolute smash. Well done. That's going to be a big win for you. Paw Patrol with the first real question here. Hello, Matt. I have AJB, and it looks like he's going to be out again for another week or 2. Is Dawson in play as a short-term replacement? Thanks. No, I don't think so. AJ Brown and Devontae Smith have missed time this year, and Jahan Dotson has done diddly bupkis. I think he had a catch, if I remember what the broadcast said correctly, He had a catch for 36 yards this past week, and that was more yards than he had all year put together entering the game. So no, I have no interest in Jahan Dotson. I think the tight ends will pick up some of the slack. I think Saquon Barkley will pick up some of the slack, and I think Devontae Smith will pick up some of the slack. But I don't think Jahan Dotson will. I would not add him. I would literally rather have any of the wide receivers that I named in this show or the like multiple other wide receivers that I didn't name that are in the waiver wire column all over Jahan Dotson. MacFam says, I traded Tillman in my keeper league for first round next season. Lol. Probably a good move, but it's very hard to know with keeper rules. But still, that's usually a good thing. Jermaine Robinson asks, is Jordan Mason a safe drop? Having him on roster is stressing me out. Ooh, this is a very tough and complicated question, Jermaine. One, do you have Christian McCaffrey? If you have Christian McCaffrey, you absolutely cannot drop Jordan Mason because Jordan Mason will be good whenever he is healthy or active until Christian McCaffrey returns. And even when CMC is back, Jordan Mason remains one of the best handcuffs in the league based off what we saw for the first half of the season if he is healthy. Now, of course, the difficulty is he has not been healthy. He's been dealing with this AC joint shoulder sprain injury thing. And the worst part of it is that he has played through it a couple weeks, but it has then taken him out of the game, and that's made it much worse from a fantasy perspective. It's almost like we would have liked him to have just been ruled out from the beginning and not played in the game because that wouldn't have hurt us so much. So I get the fact that he's stressing you out. Having said all that, I don't think you can drop him in the vast majority of leagues. Until CMC returns, which there is a good possibility will be next week, week 10. So if he does, this doesn't apply. But if CMC is out next week still and Jordan Mason is active, you have to start him. Even with the injury concern, he's just too good when he plays the full game. He's legitimately an RB1 and usually a high-end RB1. When CMC is back, again, Jordan Mason remains one of the best handcuffs in the league. And the whole waiver wire section in the column this week for running backs is just handcuffs because there's not anybody better right now. So you just want these guys who have high upside down the stretch if something happens to their starter. Jordan Mason has shown he can be a legitimate RB1 for his team with the starter out, has shown that with that opportunity, he can be a fantasy RB1 legitimately. The guy ahead of him in CMC is dealing with Achilles tendonitis, which means there's a great chance that, he's not healthy for the entire rest of the season, which means Jordan Mason has a better chance probably to be a starter again than some of the other handcuffs. It's just like he's probably the most worthy handcuff stash in fantasy. So I'd probably not be dropping him. Having said all that, if you're in a bad spot and need starting players and Mason would just be a handcuff because CMC is going to play again in week 10, then he is potentially droppable if CMC is back. But I'd really rather not do it. Long-winded answer. Sorry, but it's a complex one. Corian2121 says, I hope Shane Steichen, gets fired soon. He is trash. Agree, Corlon. He is not very good. Having said that, for the record, though I don't even know if it was his decision to bench Anthony Richardson, it might have come from Jimmy Irsay or higher up in the organization. I do still believe that benching Anthony Richardson was the right call. I'm not sure whether that's the most popular take, especially after last night when Joe Flacco was no better, quote unquote, and the offense was not very good. Having said that, and this is kind of the whole point and is very amusing, Joe Flacco was still better than Anthony Richardson has been. He had a 59% completion percentage, 6.6 yards per attempt, 63 passer rating sounds horrific, but Anthony Richardson had been that bad or worse in most of those stats. It's utterly insane how bad Anthony Richardson was. And I think that most of the people who got on, all the talking heads on sports shows that said, why would you do this? How could you do this? You just drafted him highly. You have to let him develop. I think they were largely ignoring just how bad Anthony Richardson was. I made some comparisons on Twitter to Tim Tebow, but Tim Tebow was better. And you can pick any highly drafted utter bust, and they were all better in the last 20 years or similar to Anthony Richardson from a statistical perspective. So the sidebar here. I don't think Anthony Richardson should be starting. I think he should be benched and try to learn and figure out how to get his whatever it is that resulted in his horrible, horrible completion percentage and functionality as a passer. Figure that out, get it fixed and cleaned up, then come back. Mac fan with some more comments, but not a question. JMW85 asks, should I try to sell JSN high or see what will happen with him? Yes, you should try to sell JSN high. The return will be interesting what you can get for him because theoretically the other people in your league, if they're smart, will know you're selling him high off that one game that DK Metcalf was out and that Metcalf should be back. So I'm not sure if anyone's going to buy JSN at wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2 value, which is, not necessarily what you want to get, but you want to get something good for him. Metcalf will be back. JSN will not do what he did this past week again, probably all year. It was maybe his best game of his career. He had 7 catches for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns. Yeah, that was the best game of his career. So if you can sell him at for low end wide receiver 2 value off that, I would absolutely do that. If you can sell him for high end wide receiver 3 value, probably still doing that. It would maybe depend on what you're getting back. So, yeah, you should try to sell him high. It's just a question of how high of a value can you get back to whether or not you pull the trigger. Jermaine Robinson. Speaking with MacFam, talking about Jordan Mason. Kamara, HN, K9, and Brooks are your running backs. Okay, see, so with Brooks as your running back, that's another good reason to hold on to Mason until we know that Jonathan Brooks is going to be a starter and a good fantasy play. Because if he's not, if he doesn't even play, which is still a possibility, they have to activate him before this next week. But if he even starts playing and then is not doing anything, Jordan Mason is a nice little insurance play to have in that case. It's another good reason to keep Jordan Mason, Jermaine. Lots of back and forth in the chat between everybody. MacFam says that the new Darren Rizzi most likely does not have the Riz. True. He is a special teams coordinator in the NFL. I don't think that is very commonly connected to Riz. MacFam says Olave will have an extensive concussion eval. This is his 5th concussion in 2 seasons, I think. Yes. I don't know if it's in 2 seasons, but I believe it's his 5th since college, which is a longer span of time, but still not great. MacFam says, is Calcaterra, which is the backup Eagles tight end, a ad in place of AJB? Oh, boy. Dallas Goedert. Let me check in on his injury real quick. Dealing with a hamstring injury. It is unclear when he'll return. I think he should be back sooner than later. So I don't know if Calcaterra is the best ad unless you're really in need at the tight end position. He'd be like somewhere around 15 to 18 for me at the tight end position, even when Dallas Goedert is out. And then when Goddard is back, he becomes completely useless. So there's many other tight ends I'd rather add than Calcaterra, even with AJB out. Having said that, I will note, I think Calcaterra is probably a better fantasy play than Jahan Dotson. So there is that. MacFam says, if Dak and CD may be out multiple weeks, are any Cowboys QBs an ad? No. Unless you're in a deep 2 QB league. I have no interest in Cooper Rush. Especially if CD Lamb is out, which I don't think will be the case. He played through the banged up shoulder that it seemed like he had on Sunday. So theoretically, he should be able to play with a week of recovery from that. Pinoy Penn says, thoughts on Quentin Johnston? I don't like him. He had 5 targets, caught 4 of them for 118 yards and a touchdown. 66 of those yards and one of the touchdowns, or the touchdown, came on a significantly broken defensive play. Outside of that, he had 52 yards and no touchdown on 3 catches. And that's what he's been doing most of the year. I like Ladd McConkey better. I think he's more reliable. He also had more targets than Quentin Johnston in this game. And I think Quentin Johnston had a big lucky game with a couple big plays, but that won't typically be the case. He's maybe looking a little bit better with the Chargers offense and Justin Herbert being a little more pass happy now than they were earlier in the year. But I still don't like Quentin Johnston. I'm not excited to add or start him. He's not even in my waiver wire column. Excuse me, got a little stuffy in the nose. Jesse Driscoll says, Ty Hill. I assume that means Tyreek Hill. What's your thought? I have Achane. Should I try and shop Hill? I have Braylon Allen. Should I switch for Ray Davis? Also, Pearsall. Someone dropped him. I swooped him up. Thoughts on him? Have CMC. Let's go. Okay, so several questions here from Jesse. My thoughts on Tyreek Hill are he's amazing. He should be a wide receiver 1 rest of season. I don't think you should be trading him. Primarily because he had that bad stretch with no Tua, and then he only had 4 catches for 80 yards and no touchdowns in this past week against the Buffalo Bills, who are a really, really, really good defense against wide receivers. So I think you're probably selling Taysom Hill at arguably his lowest value right now. So no, I would not try to shop him. And I'm okay starting both Achane and Hill. You mentioned you have Achane. Should I try and shop Hill? I just start both. They're both amazing and both number ones at their position. I have Braylon Allen. Should I switch for Ray Davis? That is honestly a complete preference thing. Braylon Allen and Ray Davis are 2 of the best handcuffs in the league. They're both mentioned in the handcuff section of my waiver wire column this week. It both are amazing upside, like legitimate RB1 opportunity guys. Should they get the starting role? It's just a question of would Breece Hall or James Cook get hurt? And there's no way we can predict that. So you're literally just like flipping a coin here and hoping in fate as to which one you take. I would not prefer one over the other particularly at all. It's just a fate question. Also, Pearsall, someone dropped him. You scooped him up. Thoughts on him? I like him. I think he has a chance to develop into the wide receiver 1 for the 49ers. Now, it's worth noting the wide receiver 1 for the 49ers really just means like the offensive weapon 1D or A, B, C, or D, or E, depending on the week. Because you've got Debo, you're going to have CMC back, you've got George Kittle, you got Jawan Jennings. All of them are going to be doing stuff. Being the wide receiver 1 for San Fran is the same as being the wide receiver 1 for, Las Vegas or, I don't know, Washington, where you expect that guy to be the stud and to get the vast majority of opportunity. Excuse me. So I like Pearsall, but he's like a back-end wide receiver stash kind of guy. You're not starting him with confidence yet, necessarily. Paw Patrol says, Douglas, that's Demario Douglas, Quentin Johnston, Moore. I assume that is the Moore from the Panthers. I can't even remember what his first name is. I have no interest in him. Get him out of the list. Ray McLeod and DeMarcus Robinson are all available on waivers this week. Is there one you like as the best pickup? Yes, there is, Paw Patrol. I'm tempted to tell you to go for 44.com/plans and sign up for the waiver wire column because I list all of the wide receivers in priority order, which means you would get the answer to this question. And I'm kind of spoiling it if I tell you. However, because you were here in the chat asking multiple questions, and I appreciate that, I will tell you. But you should go sign up to get these answers in the future. Demario Douglas is my favorite of that group, and it's not particularly close. As I said, I left Quentin Johnston out of the column. I just don't think he's going to be reliably good. The Moore from the Panthers. Okay, I feel like I have to look him up so that I can say his first name. It's not David, I don't think. It is David. Good gracious. Yeah, I have no interest in David Moore. Ray McLeod. I know Drake London is injured or suffered a likely hip pointer injury. I don't think it's likely to keep him out for a long period of time. And even if he did, I'm not super excited about Ray McLeod. I think he'll have like 4 or 5 catches for 40 yards or something and probably not score very often. So that doesn't get me excited. And then DeMarcus Robinson, I really like. But as I noted in the waiver wire column, what I like him as is the rare and odd and curious wide receiver handcuff. Because if and when Elijah Moore. Okay. I'll get back to that in a second. If and when Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua is out, Demarcus Robinson becomes a great play. But one of them has to be out. So he's kind of this odd wide receiver handcuff. So you can add him, but he's more of a stash. Demario Douglas, who is my number one of this group by a long shot, I think is a realistic good play, especially in PPR. Any week that Drake May is the quarterback, which obviously should be the case rest of season. I think Demario Douglas is a good play. So he's the pickup for me by a mile, and I would consider starting him in a lot of lineups. And then you said, sorry, it's Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore is right above Demario Douglas, which is the reason he made it in this podcast, and Demario Douglas didn't. So all that about Demario Douglas to say, I would technically prefer Elijah Moore. I prefer him slightly over Demario Douglas. It's worth noting, I have them for the same fab bid amount. They're in the same tier together that I mentioned earlier in the podcast. And Elijah Moore is on bye this week, if I'm not mistaken. Let me double check. Yes, he is. So if you need a play this week, Demario Douglas, well, he gets the Bears, so that's not a great play either. Regardless, they're in a very similar tier to me. Elijah Moore, I have like a spot ahead in the priority order. Him, Jalen Tolbert, and Demario Douglas are all kind of grouped together for me. But they're all very similar, so it's more or less a coin flip between those guys as to who will be better. Look at the matchups maybe and see what works best for your roster. MacFam asks, trade question. Kelsey and Kyron for Devontae, Rashad, and John Brooks redraft. Okay, so MacFam, this heavily depends on who your backup tight end is. Assuming you're the team trading away Kelsey. Because you have to have a good tight end starter. So I feel like we need to know that. But I will assume, unless you write it into chat, that your backup tight end is a decent starter, like maybe you got a K. Dotton or a Tucker Crafts on waivers. So if that is the case, trade Kelsey and Kyron Williams for Devontae Smith, Rashad White, and Jonathan Brooks. Probably not, unless all three of those guys would be starters for you down the stretch. I typically do not like giving up the best player in the trade by a good amount, and it is worth arguing that from a value perspective, Kyron Williams is the most valuable, and then Kelsey is the second or third most valuable, and then these other three guys come after that. Maybe Devontae Smith is above Kelsey if A.J. Brown misses significant time. Maybe Rashad White is above Kelsey in PPR if he can hold off Bucky Irving, but that seems unlikely lately. He most likely will be a receiving play down the stretch. Maybe Jonathan Brooks will be more valuable than Kelsey if Jonathan Brooks becomes everything that all of his truthers, me included, hope for him to be down the stretch. But that's a lot of ifs. So unless you have a very shallow roster where picking up all three of these guys would make them all starters for you down the stretch, and you get 3 starters for 2, which is nice, I would not trade Kelsey and Kyron, I don't think, for this return. But if that is the case, it is viable. It's not horrible in that case. Jermaine Robinson comments, the decision-making of Trevor Lawrence needs to be studied. He throws a potential game-winning pass to a third-string RB rather than Brian Thomas Jr., SMH. Yeah, worth noting that was a jump ball, potential game-winning jump ball to a third-string running back who got mossed by the defender. Agree there. Trevor Lawrence, not a great franchise quarterback. I think we've reached that point pretty confidently at this point. MacFam says, are we trading for Odunze rest of season? And then follows it up with Marvin Harrison Jr. for Odunze? No, I don't think so. So Rome Odunze had a really good week this past Sunday. He had 5 catches for 104 yards with a 44-yard long reception. Before that, his receiving logs and yardage, catches and yardage, actually. Let's go through them, shall we? 3 catches for 41 yards, no touchdown. 2 catches for 40 yards, no touchdown. 5 catches for 40 yards, no touchdown. 1 catch for 10 yards, no touchdown. In week 3, it would be against the Colts. He had 6 catches on 11 targets for 112 yards and a touchdown. I'm pretty sure Keenan Allen was out that game, which is a big reason for that. And then before that, 33 for 0, or 2 for 33 and 0, 1 for 11 and 0. So when Keenan Allen has played, You know what? Let me just pull up this Colts game and check for Keenan Allen real quick to make sure that I don't base this whole point off a falsity. No, Keenan Allen was not there in that game. When Keenan Allen has played in the game, he has not been good at all, except for this past week against the Cardinals, who are a really, really good matchup. I think that he's a flash in the pan guy that you do not want rest of season because you're never going to know when to start him. And he's not going to be good even 50% of the time. Now, you went on to ask Marvin Harrison Jr. for Odunze. Marvin Harrison Jr. has been also flash in the panty. He seems to be either a top 18 wide receiver or outside the top 100. I think I saw a tweet about that specifically. Can't shout out who it was, but it's an actual truth. I'm not just making that up. So it's really tough. However, the point is he's 50% of the time a really good wide receiver, whereas Odunze is only really good 2 out of 8 games, so 25% of the time. So no, I do not want I do not want to give up Marvin Harrison Jr. for Rome Odunze. And I don't want to play Rome Odunze unless Keenan Allen or DJ Moore gets hurt. And I also don't trust Caleb Williams to support multiple receivers as much as I do Kyler Murray. And Marvin Harrison Jr. is the clear number 1 for that team, whereas Odunze is not. So no, I'm not making that trade, and I'm probably not making many other trades unless it's like trading Calvin Ridley for Rome Odunze. Maybe I'd do that, although I'm not even sure I'd do that. Pinoy Penge says, should I be worried about Pittman? I'm wondering if I should use my bench spot on a handcuff RB or on Elijah Moore. Tough question here. You should be a little worried about Pittman. He had 4 targets, only caught 1 for 14 yards on Sunday against the Vikings with Joe Flacco in at quarterback. He had been better with Flacco prior to that. I would hope he would be better with Flacco down the stretch. That being said, they play the Bills next week, which is a horrible matchup. You're not going to feel good about that. They play the Jets the week after that. Horrible matchup. You're not going to feel good about that. Then they face the Lions in week 12. That's a good matchup. So Pittman is a bench rider for the next couple weeks, probably. Does that mean you should drop him for a handcuff RB or Elijah Moore? Well, a handcuff RB is also a bench rider, and Elijah Moore is on bye next week, so neither of those things really solves the problem. There are some handcuff running backs I'd rather have on my bench, depending on who else you have at wide receiver. If Michael Pittman Jr. is your wide receiver 4 or 5, I might rather have a handcuff running back. Between Elijah Moore and Pittman, if it's a PPR league, I'd consider it. If it's half PPR or lower, I'm probably just holding on to Pittman and hoping things get better with Flacco down the stretch after these next couple tough matchups. But it's close there. Pittman is getting close to drop status. In fact, he was in the drop list, or I had him as close to droppable in the drop list in last week's column. Then Joe Flacco became the quarterback, and I canceled that because I hoped Pittman would be better, as he had shown with Flacco. That was not the case this past Sunday night. Hopefully will be the case moving forward. MacFam follows up the trade question that involves Kelsey with my backup tight ends are Kittle and Otton. Are you freaking kidding me, MacFam? What the heck is going on here? You have maybe the 3 best tight ends in fantasy. Not really. Otton is probably like somewhere in the top 5, back end of the top 5 after McBride. But legitimately, he is up there. So, yes, you should. Okay, so that makes Kelsey much more tradable. I can't remember what exactly the trade was anymore. Kelsey and Kyron for Devontae, Rashad, and John Brooks. Geez, this is tough because it's like Kelsey is not even starting for you, essentially, when you have George Kittle at this point. So it's almost like you're just trading Kyron Williams for those 3 guys. Man, I think you should be able to get a better return for your tight ends. I will say that, MacFam. So I still don't really like that trade. You should be able to get a better return for any of these tight ends. And I'd be pretty interested, honestly, in trading 2 of them to teams with bad tight ends and just trade them straight up for a great player in return. That's what I would be trying to do, if you can, because you have such tight end depth. It's absurd. Jesse Driscoll says, would you trade Hill, that's Tyreek Hill, I assume, and Breece Hall, for Breece Hall straight up? I think the 1-7 team is giving up. Could you imagine rolling out CMC and Hall? Ha, ha, ha. Depends on your wide receiver and running back rosters, Jesse. If they're your, let's just say they're your number one running back and wide receiver. I think I'd rather have Breece Hall because he will score a similar number of points, but at a position that's a little harder to fill. Though you're getting CMC back, so maybe you have great running back situation. They're pretty similar in value, just at different positions. So it's really a positional question. Who would you rather have the best player at the position? Yeah, tough one. Jermaine Robinson says, "Are we selling JT Jonathan Taylor while we have the chance? If so, what kind of a net return would make the most sense?" Interesting question. So it seems like he's still dealing with his injury. I believe it's an ankle. He had 13 carries for 48 yards against the Vikings. Tough matchup, tough game for the Colts. They were trailing the whole time. It was ugly the whole time. The offense didn't move the whole time. Theoretically, that could get better down the stretch. So are we trading him? I don't think so because it feels unlikely that you're getting him for trading him for great value. It feels like he's at low value right now after missing multiple weeks and a bad week this week. So I think you're probably just holding and hope things get better for the offense and for JT. If you're trading him right now, I think you're trading him as a low end RB2 and getting value that's in that range. So, like, if you could trade him for Aaron Jones, I would do that probably in that same game from last night. Aaron Jones had 21 carries for 64 yards, not really particularly great. 4 catches for 18 yards, also not particularly great. Taylor had 3 for 11, by the way. But I would probably trade away Jonathan Taylor for Aaron Jones, I think, at this point, just based on the offenses. So maybe something like that. But not in a rush to do it because, again, I think you're selling JT at a low value, very low value. All right. That is all the questions. So we will close it off there at 47 minutes and 33 seconds as I speak. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks for all the questions. Good ones. Again, you want access to this waiver wire column on 4for4.com, and you get a ton of other stuff when you subscribe. So go to 4for4.com/plans. Use promo code YouTube for 25% off of that plan. Really, really good content. Really great stuff, including my waiver wire column. I am biased. Also, if you have more questions or more waiver wire thoughts to be discussed, I am holding a Discord AMA in the 4for4 Discord tomorrow night. So show up for that. And then I will see you in the Most Accurate podcast on Friday with John Paulson. Until then, and enjoy Monday Night Football. It is the Buccaneers and the Chiefs. Should be a really good one, I'm hoping. Until then, until next time, adios.